Michael, you're good.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for another Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce webinar. We appreciate you all taking the time out of schedules to join us for one of our Women in Business Series programs. I want to thank June for speaking today to our members and the great work that her and her organization do. I'll turn it over to her in a second. Actually, I'll turn it over to Allie in a second. But again, I just want to thank you all for joining us. We definitely appreciate it. We appreciate being part of the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce. And if there's ever anything that we can do for you or your business, do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're available on social media. You can give us a call. You can give us an email. But we're there and we're happy to help you. So thank you all for joining us today. We definitely appreciate it. We also want to say we want to thank the Savings Bank, who is a series sponsor for our Women in Business program. They have been every single year since we can remember. They've been a great supporter of these programs. And without them, we couldn't do great programs like this. So I want to thank the Savings Bank for their leadership in Women in Business, and also with our programs as well. So thank you. And I'd like to introduce Allie Howden, who's going to say a few words, and introduce our speaker today. So I'll turn it over to Allie. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allie Houghton from the Savings Bank. I hope everybody's doing well today. And the Savings Bank, again, is pleased to be involved with the Merrimack Chamber and the Women in Business event. So today's speaker is June Sauvageau. June Sauvageau has over 30 years experience in management roles in human services, healthcare, and academia. Currently, June is the CEO of the Northeast Independent Living Program, Inc., a nonprofit cross-disability independent living center serving the Northeast area of Massachusetts. Previously, she was Senior Project Manager at Massachusetts General Hospital in the Quality Management and Education Department of the Imaging Operations Division, serving over 1,400 employees. Prior roles in nonprofit program management roles include Dr. Franklin Perkins School, Respite Care Coordinator with the ARC of Worcester. Healthcare leadership roles include Executive Director of Upjohn Home Healthcare, Division of Upjohn Pharmaceuticals. Education roles include Endicott College, Administrator, Senior Lecturer, Northeastern University Graduate Division, School of Professional and Continuing Studies in Adult and Organizational Learning. Mrs. Cohen has served on the board of directors of the Greater Lawrence Family Health Center, Health Quarters, and the North Shore Women in Business. June holds a master's degree in business management from Lesley College School of Management and a Bachelor of Science in Education from Pittsburgh State University. Please, everybody, help us welcome June.
Thank you, Allie, and thank you, Savings Bank and Merrimack Valley Chamber. I want to say the Savings Bank has been a great supporter of Northeast Independent Living Program over the years, so it's a very nice win to be able to have you here as well. So I guess it was funny, I was listening to that whole bio and I was, oh my goodness, is that me? I guess that is career resiliency, right? Other people would look at it and say, gosh, she changed jobs a lot. So what is career resiliency and what does that all mean? So thank you for that introduction. So I hope we can keep this really formal today. It looks like we have a fairly small group, so if people feel like they really want to engage and make it a lot more interactive, please feel free, turn on your videos, join in, and I don't want this to be too formal and stuffy and me thinking I know everything I need to say. So join in and let's get into it. So I guess the most important part, and I won't now after I've heard all that stuff about me, I was only going to say that one of the things about my background is that I really did kind of move between different industries, which was surprising, but yet it really wasn't. Like if people look at all those things, they'd say, well, geez, what a job hopper she was. Or, geez, she ran her own business doing, career counseling. She was a career director. And then she got into healthcare and then she got into education. And I think making those threads and those connections in your own way is really the theory of career resiliency. It's like saying, here's what I love to do. Here's what I'm good at. And here's the kind of environment. And when you meet people and you network with people, you start to hear more about different environments. And then you see in yourself the transition of how your skills match up. And then you start kind of having more and more conversations. So it's not a really hard science, but it is kind of breaking some of the barriers of some of our old thinking of where you go to school, and when you finish school, you go in your career. And then from your career, you go to retirement. and it seems very linear. And I think when we talk about career resiliency, we're not talking in such a linear way. I will move the slide, please. Rayan? Yeah, thank you. And we're going to move past that slide as well. Thank you. So let's talk about NILP, because that's really important. Northeast Independent Living Program. We went through a big rebranding a few years ago, and we went to just the initials NILP. And the reason we did that is because the term Northeast Independent Living has been so co-opted over the years. But independent living is actually a term by the federal government back in the 70s. Advocates with disabilities pushed to get equal rights for independent living. And that's where independent living comes from. But that term now has so many other meanings that we went to the NILP. I've been here since 2008. And our organization, believe it or not, in Merrimack Valley, serves over 5,000 consumers. We use the term consumers instead of clients. And that's important because we mean that the people we work with, we work side by side. We have people who choose to have us help them, partner with them to reach their independent living goals. So it's not like they're a client, you know, it's not like there's a hierarchical relationship. So we use the term consumers. So we also are a recovery learning community. And that's important because when you think about disabilities, years and years ago, our agency used to have programs for adults with physical disabilities, programs for people with psychiatric disabilities, programs for young people who were transitioning. And it was very, very siloed in terms of disabilities. Even though we served multiple cross-disability needs, we kind of had silos between psychiatric and with physical. And today, the world has evolved. And really what we have now is a peer movement that works with folks who have mental health, behavioral health needs and challenges, as well as people with physical disabilities, as well as folks on the autism spectrum or with any other disability. So it's kind of an interesting agency. We're here, all ages, all disabilities. What do we do? Next slide, please. So what we do are 5 core services. Information referral. So if you know anybody, a family member or a friend, a neighbor, and that person has someone who's really struggling with getting the services and supports they need, call us. And all of our services are free, by the way. All of our services are paid for through federal and state dollars. So we're here for the community. We've been here for 40 years, by the way. So information referral, advocacy. Sometimes you just need someone who not only is a peer and a peer voice, someone who's been there, but you also need our advocacy and our systems advocacy. So we're on your side, whether it's an ADA issue, Americans with Disabilities Act, that needs some advocacy, or whether it is as simple as some advocacy or not so simple with some school system services for your child with special needs. Peer mentoring, peer counseling. Again, our youth program has young people who have disabilities who have really soared and done really well and gone through college, and they're there to be able to work with other young people who are transitioning in the high school system to after age 22, what happens next. The last 2 services are really kind of around training, around transportation training around independent living skills, such as maybe food, budgeting, etc. And transition could be transition for youth, as I talked about, or it could be transition for folks who are aging and want to age in place, but end up with a rehab or a hospitalization and need to transition back into their home. So, and lastly, we do a lot of education and consulting. That's kind of my little baby because I really wanted to kind of tie in. Remember what I say about career resiliency is if you love something and you're good at it, bring it with you and bring it into different environments. So when I came here at NILP, it was one of those things I loved is I didn't want to give up education and I didn't want to give up my consulting and training background. So brought it into NILP. And now we go out and we speak and train to healthcare companies and businesses all over Massachusetts. So, but that is a fee for service. That's our consulting division. So that's our agency. That's me. Let's get on to what is career resiliency meaning. and how can we all kind of embrace a little bit and maybe have a few takeaways today. So when we talked about career resiliency and you're thinking about that title, I've already mentioned about values, our own values, skills, and interests, matching up what works for us to organizational goals. And I also talked about, no longer are we at career life stages that are very, very boxed and in step and very linear. Nope, the world is a lot different today. And goals and challenges, we call it more of a braided lifestyle. You have the ability to do education at all times of your life. You have the ability to do work all through your life. There doesn't have to be this beginning and end of education, this beginning and end of your work life, and beginning and end of the retirement phase. Now it's a much more braided lifestyle. This little graph, I found this as I was preparing to update some of my slides and think about this topic today. And one of the things that I noticed on this graph here, the bar graph, is that the world has changed in terms of when you think about our fathers and mothers, that silent generation. Again, that kind of 40 years at a company with a pension, with a family, that model is really what you see in that bottom bracket, the silent. 85% folks had a family, had a job, had that kind of traditional. And then you start to see those percentages shift. And when you start to look at the Gen X's and the millennials, there is a lot more braided lifestyles demonstrated in the fact that families don't necessarily happen when you finish high school or finish college. They may happen at different times. The definition of family may look different. And the bottom line is that 55% have a family, live with a family, compared to 85% of the silent generation. So I just thought that was an interesting kind of thing to put into the mix when we talk about how things have changed in careers and what means that career resiliency is even more important than ever. Next slide, please. So I actually want to introduce, here in the room with me is Candace, and I apologize, I just said, oh, you know who's here? Candace. Candace works here with us at NILP. She's our development director. And the reason I've asked Candace here for a couple of reasons. One, for security blanket, because we can work together here. And secondly, because we're going to do some role playing and we're going to kind of try to hopefully bring this to life a little. So one of the tools I thought we could try that would be fun for us to learn and maybe a good takeaway is when we think about career resiliency, I've been talking a lot about, oh, it's about you and your skills and where you want to go and how you bring that to organizations. Sounds kind of fluffy. But what if you did this? Have you ever thought about what are you moving towards and what are you moving away from? Toward and away language is really important. Have you ever heard someone who's thinking about making a career change or is unhappy in their job and they say, oh my goodness, I tell you, I got to get out of, I have a boss that's really difficult. I don't really care for my coworkers. It's like, I don't have a real team feeling, and I really need to get away from that. I need to find a new job. They're moving away from. What if that same person said to you, you know, I'm really feeling that I'm ready for something new. I really feel like I want to move towards working in more of a team environment. I really am looking towards working more with maybe having a little bit more responsibility where my voice is probably more part of a significant contribution. I'm then moving towards an environment that I feel like is more flexible. With both of those examples, do you hear a difference in terms of positive sounding or negative sounding? I would think. Yeah. The first sounds much, it's almost like you can't help but sound negative when you talk about moving away from something. Just the mere fact that you are saying you're moving away is like, oh, I got to get out of this, or it's not working for me, or I'm not happy with this. I need to move towards. But as soon as you change and you use the word moving towards, people listen differently. You listen to yourself differently. You start to hear, what do I want? Where do I want to go to? So that was our first step. Can I just take a minute and stop and ask folks if maybe they can use the raise your hand piece and say, does this make sense to you, or any questions with this? Can I see people's hands? I don't know if people know how to use the hand. Jeez.
Folks can also unmute themselves in order to communicate with June. And somebody just wrote in, totally makes sense, and it is always better to be positive than negative.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you. Yeah, because I don't think you need, sometimes people don't even realize how negative they're sounding. It's not like it's clear when you vent to a friend, you know that you're venting, but sometimes you're in a business meeting or you're talking with another colleague and you don't even realize that your language you use starts to sound negative. So in the beginning, when I first used this technique with my clients with career counseling, we really practiced even just using the words moving toward, and practice that language. And yeah, and here's some points. Whenever an employee vents, I remind them of all areas. Yeah, moving towards sounds more hopeful, and it is about perspective. Thank you for those comments. Yeah, it's just a simple technique, but it's a good takeaway, I'm hoping, in this short time that you can really use. All right, let's get on to the next slide. Okay, so that technique, by the way, as simple as it sounds, is really based on a theory called Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP. Oh, almost like NILP. I never even thought of that. Neuro-Linguistic Programming. What that means is neuro, brain, linguistic, language, and programming patterns. So what is neuro-linguistic programming, the study of language and brain, says that we're unconsciously sometimes using our patterns of speech in a way that sends messages that have this meaning that can be the positive or negative, or can be perceived quite differently. And I'll use an example. So if I'm a sender and I'm saying something and I say, boy, June is really ambitious. June is really ambitious. And I'm trying to say it in a way that's like, no, I mean, June is really ambitious. Like she's always there. She starts in the morning, gets there early, and she's the last one there. Like, and that word ambitious is a word that shouldn't have a negative meaning or a positive meaning necessarily. But when I used to think of the word ambitious, it meant to me the person takes initiative, the person's ambitious, she wants to learn, she wants to grow. All those send positive messages to me. So when I use those words, that I'm ambitious, or I take initiative, or I like to grow, all sounds very, very positive to me. And I might be sending those vibes out and those messages out. But guess what? There are people who hear that differently. There are people who've had experiences that when they receive that message, this is what neuro-linguistic programming would say, they receive that message and they're like, oh, here she comes. If she asks one more question, this is a true story. One time early on in my career, someone said to me, and I'm going to use the exact quote, she's one ambitious broad. And that was said to me. I cannot believe it. And I only overheard it because someone else reported it back to me. And I heard that this person was communicating. So it came right back to me. She is one ambitious broad. How negative was that? I had no idea that's how I was being perceived. Hello. But, and the person, the receivers could be like, earn your dues. Oh, that person's not going to stay long. She's so ambitious. She's not going to stay long. So this is a really good example of how, unbeknownst to ourselves, we are hearing and seeing, and our own perceptions are embedded in our brains from previous experiences. And even simple words we choose can be taken very differently based on someone else's perceived experience with that. Does that make sense? So I was ambitious, I stayed ambitious, and I am still ambitious. And I see it as a real value of what I believe helps me to stay steeped in learning. And because I do that, I feel I grow. And yes, it does mean that I had different opportunities that I reached for. And I was very happy about that. It was a juggle oftentimes, but I enjoyed it. So I guess for me, that frame as the sender, that messaging to me worked and it was fine. And I didn't have a negative to it. But I am explaining that I think we really have to think about what other people there, be aware that other people have different intonations and different values with other words. Does that make sense? That's a really important thing. Has anybody ever experienced that where they're really feeling like they're being positive and it really gets twisted on them or turned on them? No. Okay, so let's go on. Let's move on. So let's do a coaching experience. So Candace and I are going to do a role play and let's sort of practice this one out. So Candace will be the employee and I'll be the coach. And let's talk about this. So Candace, go ahead. You're the employee.
Things are really hectic this time of year. With the annual meeting, I can't get caught up. People always want something different from last week or even last year. Why does this have to be so stressful?
Well, Candace, the annual meeting comes every year at this time. You just need to improve your planning and use the system I showed you.
Well, I have been using the system, but again, you know, when people throw different things at you, you can't just stick to the same system every time.
Well, I don't know. I really don't know what else to say because I think we've been through this before and I'm a little disappointed that, you know, you still haven't figured it out. Okay, so let's stop. So what are the coaching miscues here? And what would be some suggested improvements? And I'm going to stop for a minute and ask for input from folks. So what could the coach have said to this employee? And the coach could be their colleague, their boss, one of their team members who leads that project. But what would be some of the suggested ways that could improve this? Because there are coaching miscues. Okay. Tracy says, ask employee, what can you do differently to make this easier on you? Okay. All right. What else? Suggest another way to plan for it. Okay. Super. Okay, so let's try that. So let me make sure I use the same words here. So go ahead, say that again, Candace. What is your issue?
Well, things are really hectic this time of the year with the annual meeting, but I'm really looking forward to this as an opportunity to maybe do something a little bit differently. I know we kind of stick to the same plan every year, but I think it would be a good opportunity to switch things up, maybe do something a little bit more creative this time. Do you have any suggestions where I could maybe start?
Yeah, thank you, Candace. That sort of invites some of the responses from the folks in the group today, because your stance, your words, your choices you're moving towards really invites me to be better. It invites me to not just point to the old system. So one of the things is that one of the folks said, suggest another way to plan for it. So what, let's think about this creative. You're saying you might want to be more creative. How might you be doing it differently this year? What kinds of things would you like to do if you had the means to do it financially or the resources?
Well, I think this time around, I definitely like to get more people involved in the organization. I feel like in the past, we kind of just do the event ourselves as the development team, but maybe involving programs more and seeing what they'd like to bring to the event. It may cost a little bit more, but I think it will really help bring the team closer together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I mean, it sounds like you're really thinking out loud and sort of using that creativity. As one of our participants said, give the employee the opportunity to talk it through and figure it out for themselves and give advice when asked. It kind of set up, and that's a great point, because it kind of set up with this, the way the employee spoke originally in the language in the word choice, it came across to the receiver as, complaint, and so then it didn't invite the coach into that kind of conversation that we're talking about now, which is the opportunity to do something different. Also, the coach really did miscue. like pointing to the same old, or pointing to like, hey, I told you, I showed you. It's almost like saying, I told you so. Not a very good coaching technique for sure. So look at the process, questions coming at her. Can anything be delegated or structured differently? Yeah, so that's a great coaching suggestion for improvement, is saying, you know, how can I help you? Is there anything that could be delegated or structured differently? How can I help you to solve this a little bit better yourself? All really good kinds of comments, because doesn't it sound like more teamwork? Doesn't it sound more like, and not hierarchical? Like that first coach response sounded very hierarchical, didn't it? You know, it comes every year, you need to do your planning. You know, I almost feel like my finger's ready to point. And the system that I showed you, I know better than you, hierarchical. Where with some of the suggestions from our participants, it sounds more engaging. It sounds more equal. It sounds more like team kind of thing. So, but it is so funny how coming out of the chute, the way the employee comes out of the chute or the way the coach comes out of the chute can really lead to these sender-receiver messages that just kind of go down a rat hole sometimes. All right, let's go on to the next coaching. Okay, coaching Miscue. Go ahead, employee Candace.
She gets on my nerves.
Oh, well, why don't you just sit down and discuss it with her? I'm sure you two can solve this like adults.
Well, we've sat down a few times, we've discussed it. I've been more than patient with her, but she's just not willing to hear what I'm saying.
Well, I guess you got to sit down again, discuss it again, and I'm sure that you can solve it. You're both adults. I have confidence that you'll solve it.
All right, I'll try it again.
Okay, so coaching miscues, some suggestions for improvement. What did the coach do wrong? Mentioning that they aren't adults can be demeaning. Absolutely. That is a shout out. That word just kind of goes right down like chalk on a chalkboard, right? Very disrespectful, very offensive, right? To say, what, you're not acting like an adult? Yeah, very, very important. So, and it's such a one-dimensional conversation, isn't it? The coach is giving such a one-dimensional answer, and yet, I think the employee could kind of maybe work on this a little bit too with the messaging. And career resiliency is about messaging. I guess that's kind of one of the big takeaways from this. It's about, we don't realize how we sound and how we can just sort of work on that. So Candace, help me to understand this. She gets on my nerves.
Well, you know, we work together in the annual meeting, for example, and I try to get her to think a little bit differently to help with, you know, bringing new creative ideas, but she just wants to do things the old way. She's not willing to hear anything new or even try.
Oh, gosh. And that must be difficult for you to you know, be able to infuse your creativity with it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's very difficult.
Yeah. Are there some things that you think that she really likes about the way she used to do it that maybe you could incorporate and then build on it in a different way?
That's interesting. I haven't thought about that before. Let me think about that, actually. That might be a good way to approach it.
Yeah, maybe think about that. Let's see, what other kinds of things do we have? Specific of what action is getting on her nerves. Yeah, always bring issues with a possible solution. That's the best advice I ever got from a manager, Eileen, that you shared. Always bring issues with a possible solution. When an employee comes to a manager or a coach, a team member, a lead, it is so important to say, you know, I've really struggled with this, and this is what I've been trying, and this is what I think. I would like to try this as a solution. I don't know if it would work. What do you think? So you're bringing to the table, when you do bring a possible solution, it doesn't feel like you're complaining, does it? It feels like you are being constructive. It feels like you're being a team lead. It feels like you care about the commitment you give to a project or to the outcome. All those things come through when you're bringing that possible solution. So it's like layers of good stuff just bubbling out of that. So very, very good. Thank you. Okay, so let's try going to the next slide. I want to be conscious of our time. So I'm going to stop here for a moment and say that I want to kind of bring folks in to the thought process of, okay, so how do we make this more in our consciousness? What are the takeaways from this that we bring this into our consciousness? I guess I would start us off with thinking about, you know, how do you become the one that everybody wants on the team? How do you want to be the one that everybody chooses? Like, oh, please, please, I hope she's on our team. What is the thing that that person, yourself or your teammate, has that really brings that interest in wanting to work with you? And I'm going to say it's that first thing. It's trust. It's understanding. It's that you come to the table with a sense of, you know, even though you've probably got burned a few times sometimes when you are so trustworthy, but starting from a basis of trust and understanding. There was a wonderful book I read years ago, which is probably dated now, but I think it's a great book, is, you know, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the chapter that I loved the best was help to understand, seek to understand first before being understood. And that's probably the key to linguistic programming, right? Neuro-linguistic programming. If you're seeking to understand, you're seeking to understand a sender's messaging and make sure that you're able to engage in that conversation enough that you're learning about understanding what that person cares about, what they're trying to get across, and you're really at their point. You're taking them at their point versus really at your point of what you're trying to get across. In other words, seek to understand first and then seek to be understood. So forging a partnership to be able to have that dialogue, and that really is based on trust. The commitment piece, I think that's the thing about career resiliency. When we talked about being ambitious and learning and growing, and it's so positive, but it really also can be viewed as inspiring that commitment, that you really care enough, that you're in it to really give your best 100%. And it means that you are committed, and being committed to any objective, it really does help that career resiliency, because what happens is you start to get that experience that is successful. And when you commit to something, you forge a partnership and you do something, and the outcome on a team with your team is successful, it builds your confidence, and it kind of sets you on that road to having that feeling that, hey, I can do this, and there are opportunities. And that's the first building block of that career resiliency. There's another technique I used to use, and I was cleaning my desk for this meeting, so it looked like I was really organized. And I had an elastic here. I wish I put it away now. But another technique that I have is that I was wearing an elastic for a while when I was really working on developing a lot of my career development work. And I had that elastic, and I'd pull on it and stretch it. And having that elastic and doing that was a mental, physical, neuro-linguistic programming technique that would help me think to myself, I need to stretch. I need to stretch. I need to become more flexible. And I literally did this mind, body, brain thing to say, because you know what, at that time, for me, as an example, how this translated was I was working in a college system. I was a director of career services and internships. I was a single mom, and I was not making ends meet financially. So I was always doing side gigs. That's what they call it today, side gigs. I don't know. I just had 2 jobs all the time. And one of the things was that my side jobs were taking more and more time away from my day job, and I had to make a choice. And it was like, oh my goodness, do I leave the security of a job that's, you know, I can count on, or do I go into consulting? Do I go to start my own business? And I'm telling you, that elastic, that stretch, that flexibility, I did hear somebody said to me, it takes 18 months from the time you meet a prospective client for your new business to the time that they actually pay you for your service, 18 months is the window. So I actually saved 18 months worth of house expenses, and while I was still stretching my band and ready to be able to make a move. But that flexibility and stretch, sometimes getting out of that comfort zone is not easy, and that's another part of growing those skills. So building new competencies not only is, you know, being able to do a specific skill for your job, whether it's making a widget or making a widget better. It's not just building competencies that you can touch that, you know, make your job right, but it's also building the competencies in yourself around trusting your instincts, trusting your voice, being more comfortable with flexibility, being more comfortable with being outside of your comfort range, taking more risk. All of those things are part of growing your skills. Next slide, please. Yeah, here's an important thing, persistence, right? Stamina and discipline. Great words. Hard, those words for me are really hard. People sometimes say, oh, I'm like a dog with a bone, and I can be that way. I can be really like, you know, I'm just so committed to something. I'm like holding on for dear life for things, and I want it to work, and I'll keep working on a project, sometimes long after I probably shouldn't have. But the persistence is important. Stamina and discipline, that's hard. I mean, it's hard to get up every day and to say, like, my thing I used to say is just show up. Show up. Here's 10 people here today that came to this business series, this Women in Business, this Merrimack Valley event. They showed up. And just showing up, sometimes it's really hard to just show up. There's so many competing demands, so many family needs, so many different competing work needs. And sometimes the promoting persistence means showing up. And lastly, shaping the environment, building organizational support to reward, I actually have to uncover this, to reward learning and remove barriers. Build organizational support to reward learning and remove barriers. So shaping the environment is a big one, and it's a tough one. But like that woman that said to a colleague of mine, actually said it to a president of the company. She's one ambitious broad. Shaping the environment's a tough one, right? But it is important to be able to say the organization doesn't reflect just that one voice. And if I went back to my department, and I was like 30 at the time, and this woman was in her late 50s or 60s, I don't even know, I couldn't even tell her age, but it was the fact that she felt I was this young upstart that was coming into her territory. At least that's the way I perceived it. And when you think about the environment, you do need to recognize that there are mores and cultural pieces of that environment that are going to be hard to move. And it isn't your responsibility to shape everything in there. But what you can do is be really responsible with your voice and responsible about what you say, who do you say it to, and how do you learn? How do you build your learning curve that helps to remove those barriers, but you're doing it in a way around learning, building a learning curve for yourself that's not too steep, but allows you to build upon yourself and build new learning for your organization. There's another book called, from Peter Senge, called about organizational learning. And it's a great book also, because it says, not only do we learn, and we need to always feel like, you know, learning doesn't stop, but also organizations learn and be part of helping that organization to learn. So I think that was my last slide, because I really wanted to leave some time for questions and answers. And I did have some quotes, I guess. Yeah, you're right. I did some quotes. So this is a great one. And I am absolutely not worried about gender with this question, because we're all, many of us love athletes and love sports. So here it is. Sure, luck means a lot in football. Not having a good quarterback is bad luck. Well, we'll see what happens without having Tom Brady this fall. But, you know, there was a study done, and I want to share this. There was a study done of CEOs and vice presidents of major companies. This was done a few years ago. And guess what they found? Is that when you asked women who are CEOs or vice presidents, so what do you attribute to your success? Moreover, and I don't know the exact number anymore, moreover, women said, I was very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. You know, it was really great luck that I had a great mentor, and this was my opportunity. But the word luck came up in not every, but most responses for women who were very successful that made it to the top, broke the glass ceiling. The same men who are in the same positions, in the same types of companies, luck was not part of their vocabulary. That wasn't the thing they hung on. And I thought that was a really interesting statistic. I used to do that when I was working on a women in leadership group with North Shore Women in Business. We used to really do a lot of research around that topic. Next slide. Oh, I like this one the best. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung. That's a great, great slide. And it really does point to our own internal controls. What we have control over is our own voice, our own messaging, and our own positive. And if we can just work on our own internal control and not look for, which is hard to do, not look for so much the external reward, but the internal reward. So I would like to end there and certainly open up for questions. And Mike, however, and Rayanne, however you want to do that.
Yeah, first off, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to talk with our members. That was a great presentation. We appreciate everything you do for right here in the Merrimack Valley, especially with the Northeast Independent Living Program. It's an amazing program, and you do a great job with your entire team there. I'm going to turn it over to Rayanne. If you have any questions, you can either type them out, or you can just unmute yourself and ask them directly. But I'm going to leave it to Rayanne to ask in case there are any typed out questions.
So again, for your questions, if you hover over your screen, you'll see on the bottom you should have a bunch of icons. The third from the left in the middle is the chat. Please feel free to put in your questions there. The first question I'm actually going to ask, and that is just for somebody who you're helping them move up in their career, like what is one piece of advice you would give them?
For moving up in their career. Upward. That's such a tough question because everyone is so individual. To move up in their career. I think it's to demonstrate to your bosses that you are very much interested in learning. I think demonstrating that you're taking opportunities, and one of the things that I think is helpful with Upward is, and it's so important, is that you take on new responsibilities. Here's my job description. I'm a career development person, or I'm a development person, or I'm a, whatever my job title is, but yet I see a project that really it looks important to the company and it looks important to me. How do I connect myself to that project? How do I get new learning so that I can either contribute to it now or later? So Upward, I think, means doing more than your regular job description. Recently, I had an employee say something like, we're trying to develop somebody. Now, I didn't say, I'm trying to develop you. Her manager didn't say, I'm trying to develop her. What we said was, you know what, there's someone who's left and there's this role that we'd like to have done. Can you, and you've shown that you're really, in 6 months, you've really learned a lot. Could you take this on? And this person took it on, started doing it. And the next thing you know, after a couple months, the person said, hey, you know what, that's not in my job description. And I was like, oh my goodness. So moving upward is not worrying about what's in your job description as much as worrying about what new learning you can get that you can help the company with. I don't know if that answers it.
Nope, that's perfect. Does anyone else have questions, or you can always unmute yourself to ask the questions also? I don't see anything coming through. Eileen did say thank you for your insights.
Thank you, Eileen. Yeah, thanks. I know this is so different, huh? Doing Zoom meetings, you know, trying to you get everyone engaged. It's our new world for sure, but I really appreciate being here.
Tracy says thank you for your advice and sharing your experience with all of us.
Well, thank you, Tracy. Thank you. Yeah, it kind of is exciting to think that the Women in Business series that you have here, it kind of reminds me, I don't even know if North Shore Women in Business is still out there. It was so long ago. It was in the 90s when I was involved with that board. But I just found like the women together, working together. In fact, because I worked at a women's college, it really felt great. Feel like you could work together and not feel competitive. You felt like it was collaborative, and it was really very, very helpful. So I'm glad to see that Merrimack Valley has this. So that's good, Mike and Ray, and glad that you're putting it together. And Salem Bank, Savings Bank.
Well, thank you again for your time today. We definitely appreciate it, and we appreciate you being part of this series. I mean, everything you just said goes hand in hand with what you and your organization are doing, so we appreciate your leadership. And if anyone has any questions, they can always email them to us later. But thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule. Thank you for all you do at the Northeast Independent Living Program. And thank you to the Savings Bank as well for their support for the series year after year. And we look forward to seeing everyone again. We have a free networking program this Friday. We have a breakfast with the Merrimack Valley Chamber next Thursday at in Haverhill at the Village Square Restaurant. We have a whole host of other programs as well coming through. But I just want to say thank you all again for taking part of this great program today. And thank you, June, and you and your team for taking the time on your schedule to talk with us today.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Yes. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.